Hello, everyone. It's 2:15, so I thought I'd get us started, even though we are having a little bit of technical difficulties, and I'm going to ask the woman in the front. I'm so sorry, but I think might have to sit where you're sitting so I can potentially have to manually click through the slides. We're having a problem with the clicker. Thanks so much for attending the Reducing Food Waste at its Source session, Case Studies from Leading Programs. I'm thrilled today to have all of you attending and thrilled to hear some of our three speakers here today. And I wanted to just start before we get into things and ask a couple of questions from the audience. Who was at Dana's opening plenary? Okay, most of the audience. That's great. Good to know. And I want to know if there's anything anyone really wants to hear. Is there something people in here really want to hear about? Is there something that you're here to learn about, one particular item about food waste? Is there any thoughts? Dana's a little bit flexible in what she can present on, so she wanted to see if there was any. Okay. Any ideas? Okay, great.
In that case, preventing food from the beginning, like from the farm to the farm to the store. That's something I'm early in the supply chain. As opposed to managing it at the end of the pipe, take care of it at the beginning of the pipe.
So managing food from farm to store, managing food from preventing food at its source, food waste at its source. And how about the fellow on the right in the blue shirt? Okay, great. Compost technology. How about you?
I have a rather specific question. In the refed report on preventing food waste, they measured the 27 different strategies, and community compost scored fairly low on both penetration and capacity and all that. So I was wondering, what were some of the reasons why community composting seemed to not be a very good potential solution?
Okay, questions about why composting is not a potential solution. Okay, great questions. Without further ado, I'm Julie Bryant, so you know from the... Oh, I missed the hand. Sorry.
Sorry, I was late. It's my fault. Funding mechanisms for such programs.
Funding mechanisms. Okay. Great funding mechanisms. Thank you so much. Okay, so just so you all know, I'm gonna have to flip through it manually, so just say slide or something like, I guess, accepting. Okay, without further ado, I'm Julie Bryant, by the way, from the San Francisco Department of the Environment. I'm thrilled to be the moderator for this session. And our first speaker is Wendy Shafir, and she is an environmental engineer with over 25 years of experience. She is currently working to reduce food waste on many fronts. She provides assistance on source reduction and measurement techniques, donation, feeding animals, compost, and AD technologies. This work addresses residential, grocery, food manufacturing, institutional, educational, and hospitality facilities. She has created 6 regional guides for food waste reduction and recovery. Food is too good to waste. So let's welcome Wendy.
Oh, the clicker might work.
No, I don't think it does.
Wait, he just brought us a new one. Let's see. Okay, so can you guys all hear me if I stand out here? Yeah. If you can't, just wave your arms. So thanks for coming, and thank you all for having me. I mean, I feel like I'm preceding two of the luminaries in the preventing wasted food world. So some of you have already heard, most of you have already heard Dana, and many of you may also know of Andrew and the amazing work that Lean Path does. So what I'm going to tell you about is what resources the Environmental Protection Agency has to offer to address reducing wasted food at its source. And I'm going to go, if you don't mind. No. Okay, there we go. I just want to go to this slide first. Actually, I'm going to back up one more and let you know that I am with the United States Environmental Protection Agency, Pacific Southwest region. And just for context, that is the region that covers California, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii and the Pacific Islands, and we're located in, our headquarters is in San Francisco. We also have offices in LA, the border, and in Hawaii. So I want to talk about the food recovery hierarchy. I'll talk about it more in a moment, but just to let you know that our presentation here is primarily to talk about source reduction, which means preventing the waste from happening in the first place, more so than to talk about donation or compost or what happens to food scraps that already exist. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a context, we're all here to talk about the very top of the food recovery hierarchy. So I'm afraid we're not going to probably talk much about compost technology, funding for that sort of thing. But if I don't mention an opportunity for communities, we have some assistance that we can provide. Yell at me and I'll do that. Let's go the other way. Which way am I going? Oops, wrong way. Okay, so as you know, or may have heard, the EPA and the United States Department of Agriculture have called for a 50% reduction in wasted food by 2030, which is, as you've heard, a pretty ambitious goal, but we have to do it. So, and the other thing is I have links throughout my presentation, so I assume that will be online and available to you to get more information on any of the areas that I'm talking about. So an interesting way to look at it, I hadn't thought about it this way, but to reach this 2030 goal, per person we have to reduce our waste from about 200 to about 100 pounds per year. So each individual person has to reduce that much in order to reach our 2030 goal. And ideally we want to reach as much of that by preventing the food waste in the first place, as Dana so eloquently taught us about how much water and all the other inputs it takes to make an egg or any other food item. So this slide really just illustrates that this is going to be a group effort. It's going to take a lot of different partners, from the households to all levels of government, to food processing, to retailers, to institutional institutions that prepare and serve food. So it's a big issue, and it's going to need all the different pieces to help tackle it. So I do want to talk about the food recovery hierarchy just a little bit. You saw a couple of different versions of it possibly today. I like the dog wins or whatever that was. So and this is a variation of the materials management hierarchy that EPA has that you've probably all seen. Reduce, reuse, recycle is kind of the simplest version of it. But when we're talking about wasting food or avoiding the waste of food, first we want to prevent it in the first place. That's what we call the source reduction. If we can't prevent it and we have wholesome food, we want to make sure that it goes to feed people. So that's the donation, the gleaning, the rescue. If we can't feed people, if the food isn't appropriate for feeding people, we want to feed animals. That's the next highest use. And this could be hog farms, because pigs can eat probably the widest variety of food scraps. And they can eat post-consumer food waste as long as it's heated. There's a federal swine act that explains how you have to treat the food, basically just by cooking it to make sure that it's safe. And other animals such as ruminants, cows and goats and so on, can eat primarily vegetable matter, and chickens have other things that they can eat. So you want to get it to animals if people can't eat it. And if that fails, then you want to look at industrial uses, which is kind of this very opaque term, which would include things like biofuels, taking fats, oils, and greases and turning them into fuel. Anaerobic digestion, where you're getting the energy out of the food scraps and using that beneficially, and then taking the digestate, what's left, composting it, and then using it to grow more crops. Composting, way down on the list, which really surprises people because they think food waste, oh, it's cool, I'm composting, I'm good, I'm composting. But it's actually, and I'll show you a slide that'll really open your eyes, it's not the first choice. And then last resort, of course, is incineration or landfill. Just to let you know, we have the hierarchy in Chinese, this is a simplified Chinese, and in Spanish, and perhaps soon we'll have it in more languages. But if anybody wants the PDFs or the source I never get this right. If anybody wants these, I can get you them in whatever format you publish things in. I have a person I can ask. So again, we're talking about source reduction, and source reduction, the biggest selling point in a lot of cases for a lot of entities is it saves money on the household level, on the institutional level, on the commercial level. If you don't waste it, you didn't buy it in the first place, so you're saving money there. And then think about all the things that happens to food once you've purchased it. You have to move it around, you store it, you refrigerate it, you prepare it, you serve it, and then if it's wasted, then you collect it, and then you have to pay for its disposal. So at every step of the way, you can be saving money by not wasting it in the first place. No idea. It just showed up like that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about various tools that EPA has. These are some of the main tools that EPA has to offer related to the sustainable management of food. And I'll also just throw in a plug. USDA has lots of great information and material as well, and I just found out today that they came out with a new guide for K-12 schools for reducing. They're really working with K-12 schools to get more of the lunches served to children eaten by children. Better for the kids and a lot less waste. And if there's anything left over, to be able to donate it. So they're doing a great job with that. So I'll talk about each of these various tools that we have, plus a few additional tools that we have that aren't on these slides. So EPA has a central website for reducing wasted food, and then we have a webinar series which is recorded, and you can take a look at. We have the Food Recovery Challenge I'll tell you a little bit about. And then we have a suite of tools for assessing wasted food, and I'll talk a little bit about those, and there's a new one of those coming up that we're working on right now. I think we mentioned that for Region 9, we created Metro Regional Food Guides, which address like the LA region, the Bay Area, and there are states in the East that have these guides for the states, which is where I got the idea, because our areas are as big as a lot of states back east. And then other regions are starting to do it for their metro areas. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Food Too Good to Waste, which is a program which is aimed at households rather than institutions or commercial entities. Somebody else mentioned farm to store, I think. I'm not going to be talking about that, and we don't really address that as much, but others may, so I just want to let you know I'm not blowing you up. We don't work as much in that area. So this is just a screenshot from the EPA Food Sustainable Management of Food website, which has a very long name, but it's epa.gov, and then sustainable-management-food, and there's a lot of different places you can go on that website, and we've just revamped it, and we're adding more and more content, so I encourage you to take a look. And that's where you'll find information on all the things that I'm going to talk about next. Has anybody heard of the Food Recovery Challenge? Good, a couple of people. So simply, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on anything, but I'll just sort of think of this as an introduction. The Food Recovery Challenge is a voluntary participation program that EPA has for basically anybody who prepares and serves food. So it's not targeted at the household, but it could be targeted at a food manufacturer, an institution, a school, retailers, restaurants, and so on. And we challenge folks to, using the hierarchy, reduce the amount of food that they create, food waste that they create, donate it, and recycle it. We have probably over 1,000 now. I didn't update my slide, but we have hundreds of businesses and organizations at every level, from a local government to Disneyland and, kind of everything in between, lots and lots of universities and so on. And we're trying to help folks with all the various tools that we have, and it's a pretty straightforward program. Once a year, that's all you have to. Once a year, they go into our retrack system and enter the amount of food waste that they source reduced, It can be as simple as one, two, or three. Source reduced, donated either for people or for animals, or recycled. And then if you want, you can get a lot more granular and use a more detailed summary and get into the real details of exactly what you did. And it's just a tracking mechanism. And we recognize organizations that have improved by reducing the amount of food that they waste, increasing the amount of food that they diverted. But even more importantly, we have this first year, I'm very proud to say, we weighted. So if you source reduce, you get more points, as it were, you get more credit than if you composted, for example. I know what slide okay, I'm going to have to just talk you through. I just realized what slide did not show up. That blank slide, it was a really important one. It's funny, I just looked at it on my computer and it was there. So, okay, we're going to do it like this. So the slide that I had was that using EPA's WARM model, which looks at the greenhouse gas implications of various ways to manage materials, you'll see that if you have your graph, and this is greenhouse gas generated, and this is greenhouse gas reduced as compared to landfill, you'll see that source reduction, you get something on the order of, these are going to be relative because I don't have the slide in front of me, about 4, and maybe it's 4 pounds of greenhouse gas equivalents per pound of food, no waste created. It's about 4. And then you go down to donated, and donated is less than 1. It's a little bit of an improvement, but so you're not creating greenhouse gas, but it's 4 times less. And then anaerobic digestion and composting are fractions of 1. Okay? Gosh, I wish I don't know where that slide's on. So that blew me away when we actually took our own WARM model, all the emissions factors that we had created. And the WARM model can get into very, very gory detail on how exactly we did all of that and what kind of a mix of average food we used and so on. And it really opened my eyes. Oh, yeah, source reduction. That's why we have a whole session on source reduction, because source reduction is so much more effective than any of the management strategies. You want to prevent it, not have to manage it. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled slide. Sorry about that. I'm glad I figured that out. I realized we didn't have that great slide. So talking again about the food recovery challenge. So we help people work their way up the hierarchy and decrease the amount of food that is being wasted in their organization. And then we recognize people. There's regional awards, there's national awards, there's awards just based on the numbers and then on the narratives and the stories and the case studies. And the Food Recovery Challenge website has information. It's really neat to look at the past year's winners, and you can read the narratives and find out how they did the good work that they did. And it's also available for not just participants who generate food, but also endorsers. This might be a city or a town or somebody who helps others to reduce the amount of food that they waste. And so, as I said, we have the tracking database, the tools, guidebooks, and the food recovery webinars that I mentioned, and a number of different awards, recognitions, and so on. And you can call us up, and they're based on the EPA region, so that there's 10 regions, and there's at least one coordinator in each region that will help you with the Food Recovery Challenge or help you get folks enrolled. Oh, no. Okay. Yep. Okay, this is one of our assessment tools, because in order to figure out whether you're reducing the amount of food that you're wasting, you need to know how much food you're wasting. So we have a number of different assessment guides. And this is a nice guide for conducting a waste assessment on a very granular level. I mean, it tells you things like how many tarps you need and what actual, you need buckets and you need tongs, very, very detailed, for doing, a dumpster dive, essentially, a periodic waste assessment. And then if you go to the next slide, we also have EPA's Reducing Wasted Food and Packaging Toolkit, which is a different way of approaching it, and also very important, which is to there's a PDF guide which has lots of information, case studies, instructions, and so on. And the companion piece to it is a spreadsheet in which you track the food that's being wasted in your organization over a period of time, preferably around 2 weeks minimum. And you get into the details. What was the material that was wasted? Why was it wasted? When did this happen? So that you can start getting into the reasons, because if you find out, and let me just pause for a moment and say thank you to Andrew, because Andrew's going to talk about his Lean Path program, and he was very, very generous in helping us to create this essentially free, very no-frills, basic version of his fabulous product. So, not that we don't endorse anything, but I will thank Andrew for his help in developing this toolkit. And it's based on an Excel spreadsheet, which you download. It's yours. You can do it what you want. You can manipulate it. It gives you lots of good information on what happened and when, and then you can get into the whys. You might find out it has to do with over-purchasing or problems with preparation or an awful lot of trim waste or spoilage. So that can be really helpful, because it's hard to reduce the waste until you know not only how much of it, but why. Why did that particular item become a waste? Okay, next slide. These are the regional food recovery guides that I created based on what I saw. Some of the East Coast states have these bans on organics in the landfill, and they were some of the early ones. And so here you have a whole lot of businesses, including some very small ones, wondering, well, what do I do? Oh, you donate it. You do this. It's like, well, who do I call? So this is who you call. So if you're in LA, San Francisco, Honolulu, Las Vegas, Reno, Sparks area, Phoenix, and I think San Diego is working on one as well, based on the template that we have. And this gets into some real detail on how to do source reduction. What are the resources in your area? Who do you actually call if you want to do composting, or who takes fats, oils, and greases? So it gets into the phone numbers, the details, who they are, what do they take, when are they open. So it gets into the really user, the information that the users need, not just this kind of the general higher level. You should donate. It's like, this is a hog farm. This is a cattle or operation that will take spent grains. So it gets into some really good detail. And honestly, that I think is what's needed, because when you're putting this out to not just the big organizations, but to all, grocery stores and restaurants and so on, you need to give them what they need to do the right thing. Food too good to waste. Okay, now this is a really different kind of program than what I've been talking about thus far. This is based on community-based social marketing. It's targeted at households. And so this is a toolkit that was created by EPA and the West Coast Climate Materials. Say that really loud.
West Coast Climate and Materials Management Forum.
I always lose some of the words on that one. Yeah. And so this is a set of materials that was created for communities to share with individual households to help attack the food waste at that level, at the household level, because that's a big piece of it. And so far I've only been talking about institutional, commercial, and so on. So the Food Too Good to Waste program has a lot of different parts that an organization can use, and sometimes it could be a community group. Cities do this. It could be a faith-based group, and so on. So if you go to the next slide. So the reason we care is because the amount of food that is wasted in the home is huge. It's huge, and this is a picture of what's wasted in a month by an average family of four. This is all the stuff that gets bought and then thrown away. Yeah, wow. So, you want to go to the next slide? So the purpose of this project is to help people make the small shifts in the way they purchase, prepare, store the food, and to just start chipping away at the amount of food that's wasted so that there's a lot less left to compost or feed to the chickens or whatever they're going to do with it. And so there's a lot of different tools. If you would go to the next slide, that come with this toolkit. For instance, this is a fresh fruit and vegetable storage guide that you can print out or do a training on or whatever. And I learned a lot. I thought I kind of knew it, but between Dana's book and these guys, it's like, Oh, I thought that was supposed to not go in the refrigerator. Or, I thought you were supposed to wrap that one up before you put it in the really useful information. And then I don't know if I have a slide of my favorite one, but if you could give me the next slide. No, I don't. My favorite one is the box that I have now in my refrigerator, and it's got a really big sign on it, and it says, "Eat this first." Right? You know, you're just cruising along the refrigerator. I put it right front and center, so anybody who opens that refrigerator, I'm supposed to eat that first. It sounds simple, but it's very helpful. A couple of other things that we have that we're working on. We have created a K-12 guide for K-12 schools who want to reduce wasted food, because the Food Nutrition Service of USDA has lots and lots of stuff, and it's kind of overwhelming how much great material they have, although, as I said, they came out with a guide, which I just saw today, I haven't looked at yet. So I tried to kind of put together in one place, all the different USDA Food Nutrition Service school lunch guides and some other materials from places like the Food Bus to help K-12 schools, and then I ran it by USDA, so the school lunch people are happy with it, so if you work with that. So that's another guide that we have online. Another guidance that we're working on is source reduction of food. Is kind of hard to measure. What do you measure what's not there? How do you measure that? How do you normalize that? How do you know if you're doing better or worse if you have different amount of students each year, or you sell a different amount of meals from week to week? So we're writing up guidance on, and we're doing it for the Food Recovery Challenge, but it can be used for anybody just to kind of see, how am I doing? I sent 2 tons less food to the composter, but did I reduce that food, or what happened there? So we have ways of, we're writing out some guidance on how to deal with that. And let's see, food too good to waste. Oh, the other thing was, as I mentioned, with the food too good to waste, we still, EPA Region 9 has a little bit of funding left to help a community to implement the food too good to waste program. And I also want to mention, it has been piloted quite a bit, and piloted and refined, and we've got reports on its effectiveness, and so it's always being improved. But if anybody has an organization or a community that would like to try implementing the food too good to waste for households, please talk to me, and we may be able to help you out with that. And my contact information, and as I said, everything is pretty much linked throughout my presentation. Okay, thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wendy. That was excellent. I was going to answer the composting question, but I knew you would. Composting requires resources, and when we don't produce the food we don't eat, we don't use any resources there. So very important why we're talking about source reduction today. We do have time for a couple of questions for Wendy, but keep in mind we actually allotted 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions for everybody. So if I don't get to you, we have time at the end. Any questions for Wendy? Yeah, in the back.
I've read articles about how the healthy food programs across the nation for school kids, they're throwing more out because they don't like it. So how do you food reduction in conjunction with that?
There's a new guide that came out today, as I mentioned, from the Food Nutrition Service, but there's a lot of different strategies. They range from having kids involved in preparing the food or trying the food, making sure that schools know that there's offer versus serve. It's not like the old days where you have to put boom, 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 boom. This is your plate. Kids get to choose between. And, with kids, choice is a huge thing. Just things like this recess before lunch. Okay? Because if you're a kid and you want to go out and play, oh, yeah, food, right. I'm going out and playing, right? But if you get them running around and then coming in, they're going to have worked up an appetite. So there's lots of different things you can do. And there's a lot of, I think it's Cornell, did a bunch of research on what actually works and what doesn't work in terms of getting kids to eat more of the food that they're served. Because it did change, and kids don't like change. So there's lots of answers to that question, fortunately.
But can I just add that actually that was an argument that kind of got debunked. Harvard did a whole study on it, and they found that in reality, waste did not increase with the food and nutrition requirements. So there's still a lot of waste, but it was happening before, it's happening after. So just it was sort of a myth floating around about that for a little while.
Okay, I think we'll move on to our second speaker, but we will get you at the end, okay? Thanks. So our second speaker, I'm thrilled to introduce Andrew Shackman, who will be speaking about tools to measure and reduce food waste. And Andrew, excuse me one second, Andrew is a food waste prevention advocate and the CEO of LeanPath, a food service technology company. Since co-founding LeanPath in 2004 to address the food waste crisis, Andrew has been working at the front lines of behavior change, helping food service operators prevent and minimize food waste in the U.S., Europe, and Australia. Under his leadership, LeanPath created the first automated and patented food waste metering system to enable real-time daily monitoring of food waste. Let's welcome Andrew.
Thanks very much. Is our clicker working again or no?
I don't think so.
Well, we can. Oh, it worked. All right. Great. Well, good afternoon. We're going to talk about source reduction some more, of course, and my particular lens that I will bring to you today is to look at the food service and hospitality world, and specifically what we can do from a source reduction perspective in that community. And we're also going to talk about measurement, of course, because that's a key part of how we tackle source reduction, and tools that can be used to do that. And so one of the challenges that I have is that when we talk about tools, people are often curious about sort of what's out there, and it's impossible for me to really give you a lot of information on that without talking a little bit about what we do at LeanPath. I'm not here to sell you anything, so it's really more meant to show you exemplars of what can be done and how technology can be used, understanding that there's a variety of innovators out there working on different parts of this. So I just kind of throw that caveat out to start with. So how many of you know us, just real quick to start with? A good number. So we've been doing this for a really long time. I've actually gotten gray hair during the time we've been working on this, or at least a little bit of it, so my mother tells me. We started in 2004, and so I guess we're 12 and a half years into this, and we're finding that this is, unfortunately, this is a challenge 12 years later. We haven't solved it yet, but the good news is that there's a tremendous amount of traction on this issue, and people are really, really warming up to it, I think, and ready to make some significant change, which is great. So this is the world that I work in. This is a commercial kitchen. We'll just could be any commercial kitchen. Maybe that one's got a little different equipment than many have. But food service and hospitality really, that's some interesting font treatment there, really struggles with waste in a number of areas. And it's not because anybody is showing up doing a bad job, right? And it's because waste happens as a byproduct of the way we operate our businesses. And there's a variety of things that we do routinely that lead to waste. So we really view the food waste as the elephant in the room, right? That there is a large amount of waste. We all see it, but we don't see it. Right? So it goes in the garbage. It happens. It happened yesterday. It happened the day before. It happened the year before. And so we've become numb in many respects to the waste that occurs. And there are moments where we may kind of have this sense that, oh, there's a problem here. But generally, we just work around the elephant. Okay, that's kind of how we've tended to establish our work practices. And also, I should note, probably for this audience, I'm going to assume there aren't any operators here. Does anyone here run a food service operation? Okay, all right. So I guess I will try to represent empathetically on behalf of the food service operator what it's like to do this work. But they've got a lot of pressure on them in this business, right? You have a chance to get fired 3 times a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it's a very immediate kind of business. And the last thing you want to do is have a problem where you run out of food. So this is something that is very very built into operations, and our job is really to help herd the elephant out of the kitchen. So what we find is that somewhere between 4 and 10% of the food that most operators purchase ends up being discarded at what we call the pre-consumer level, and you would probably call it pre-consumer too. What was funny was when we started this work, the vocabulary wasn't quite as settled as it is today. So we still find that some chefs will debate with us what is pre-consumer, and we'll have a sort of push and pull over, well, if I put it on the line, is it now post-consumer? If it's on a salad bar, is it post-consumer? for purposes of discussion, we would say as long as the control and custody of the product remains with the food service operator, it's pre-consumer. So if it is on a line, it has yet to be sold or served to a guest, it's pre-consumer because you're taking the decisions that lead to how you merchandise that line. So think of that, 4 to 10% of what you buy is wasted before it ever transfers custody to a guest or customer. So that adds up to a lot of money. Figure $1 million of spend, right? $40,000 to $100,000 of actionable opportunity there. Not 100% actionable, but somewhat actionable. So it's a big deal financially. And so why does this happen? And I think we definitely start with the perspective that nobody gets up in the morning planning to waste food, and we're simply being buffeted by a series of practices that are pretty deeply ingrained. So we've got to understand them if we want to unwind these things and solve them. So the theme that runs through a lot of this is risk management. People waste food to manage risk, often. Not exclusively, but often. So the most common one is overproduction. I am afraid I will run out of food. The risk of running out, losing profit, dissatisfying a customer causes me to make more than I need, often much more. And I view that insurance policy that I'm buying with food waste as being pretty cheap because I don't really know what it's worth. So if an insurance policy is free in your mind, then you're going to use it and you're going to rely on it. And we do that. We do that also with food safety. So of course, food safety is more important than, we're not going to make anybody sick to avoid wasting food, right? You got to serve safe food. But often, we are throwing away food that we know is perfectly good because we have practices that create margins of error around margins of error around margins of error, all with the intent of reducing risk to the point where, gosh, if we could just push this a little further, there'd be a little less risk and we're getting no gain. We're just throwing away food. And so that's a challenge. We over-merchandise because we're afraid that our product's not going to look good, that no one will take the last one or it's just not going to look great when on the setup, so we put out lots of food. These things go on and on. There's many, many things that we do that lead to us wasting food, and it's all rational, right? We do it for a reason, but we do a lot of it and we don't really see the cost. So I guess one of the big themes here is how do we make that invisible cost visible? How do we get people to recognize that that risk transfer isn't free, that there actually is a better way of working that's more efficient if we bring balance and not just solve every problem by wasting food? And I'm not going to go through every one on here, but let's just say there's lots of ways that the elephant has made himself or herself comfortable in our kitchen, and these are some of them. So, and yes, it gets a little dizzying. We'll move on. So how do you fix it? So the quick answer is, it's not difficult. Fixing wasted food, this is the good news, it's not actually very hard. And it's totally doable, and it's something that we should feel incredibly optimistic about our ability to tackle. We can make big strides on this. And I'm not saying we're going to get to perfection, because we won't, but can we make a big impact? We can. And where we need to start is with measurement. We have to go ahead and take those invisible things and make them really front and center in our thinking. And so when we begin measuring wasted food, lots of stuff happens. And I should be clear, when I talk about measurement, I'm talking about a little bit different than Wendy might with an audit, right, or where you're sort of doing a freeze frame. I'm talking about let's measure food today and tomorrow and the next day and next month and in perpetuity. I'm talking about measuring food as a standard operating practice that we waste, measuring food waste. In the same way we would balance our cash drawer every day to make sure that we haven't lost money, we need to be balancing our operation by looking at what we waste. So when we do that, first thing that happens is we learn things. And those things we can then use to make changes, right? I mean, we find out things, sometimes they're obvious, but sometimes they aren't obvious. I mean, I've seen as obvious as people upstairs in a servery are throwing away soup, and people downstairs are making soup, and they are putting it in an elevator and sending it up, and people are throwing it away. And no one's getting on the phone. I mean, like just basic stuff, right? And then other times it's a little more clever, like things that you might not expect are going on. You can maybe start to look at weather patterns, and you find that it's not just that we waste soup on hot days, it's that we waste soup when we find that the weather is unusually hot compared to the norms. Like we have our expectations, we've sort of calibrated our own production, and we find we're off that curve somewhat. So there are things that we can learn, and we can use data, and increasingly as data science becomes more central to how all of us live and work, we're going to find ways to extract more insights from this. But the other thing, and it's equally potent, is just the fact that when we measure, we change culture. And even if you don't use the data, and in fact, I will admit that I have had some clients who have sent in machines for repair, and I find like 8,000 waste events stored on them. And I'm like, clearly they haven't been looking at them because they're still on this machine. Why are they here? That's the exception, not the rule. But even if you're just doing that, people are paying attention to this because now you've modified your behavior and you're saying, let's separate waste, let's think about this discreetly, let's measure it, and that is going to change the way people think and work. And that goes all the way back to industrial psychology and the Hawthorne effect done in the late 1920s, where people did a lot of research on how you change process workers' behavior, and one of the key things is observation and measurement. So how do you actually make this feasible, though, right? Because, the first thing that a food service operator is going to say to you is, oh, you want me to do this every single day to source reduce food waste? That sounds like a good goal, but could I really expect to do that? And the answer is yes, because we now have technology that makes that functional. And so some of the things that are out there, and these are our examples, but need not be viewed as exclusively the way these problems are solved. Bench scales with cameras that allow you to actually record weights and snap photos of the items so you can see the condition of something that's being thrown away, as well as understand how much. Floor scales that allow you to put bins on them and record post-consumer waste or actually record full totes. Tablets that are more mobile that allow you to walk around and record quantities. That's something that we've learned, that certainly some things are best recorded by weight, but many others are best recorded by quantity. So these tools are out there. Most of them all function in the same way, which is to say that you try to look at your existing workflow in a kitchen. Waste is already, guess what, shocking, it's already being consolidated. It's already going somewhere, right? It's usually going to a pot wash area. Pans are getting scrapped. They're getting sanitized. You have to intercept it at that point where these trails are coming together, so there's not a lot of extra walking around, and you record what it is you're throwing away. And that usually takes about 20 seconds. It takes less time than is prescribed for proper hand washing. So whenever anybody starts to tell me they can't record their food waste, I say, do you have time to wash your hands? No one will admit that they don't have time to wash their hands. So gotcha. All right, now moving on. So people can make time for this. It's not gonna really kill them. So one of the things that we found early on, and we were really, I'll tell you about some of our failures. Like, it took us years to realize we should show people the value of the food they threw away. We had it. It was in the code. We just never bothered to show it to anyone. We just stored it, and then we sent it to the managers, and the managers knew. We're like, oh, one day our CTO said, what if we were to show it on the screen when you throw something away, the value? Oh, yeah, sure. 5 minutes of code later, it does it, right? Like the easiest thing ever to implement compared to many, many hard things. And transformative, right? Like, people go, oh, I threw away $30 worth of something. Yikes. Like, it's suddenly that feedback loop. It's just like when we're speeding and we see the little flashing speedometer that tells you you're going 40 in a 20 zone, right? Slow down. This does that, okay? So making things vivid, putting things in terms of quantitative expressions that people can understand, that feel familiar to them, because we all obviously know about money. We all know what we earn and what we're wasting, and we can understand the relationship. Also, if we can take those numbers and really project them out, because there are some people for whom a $31 problem is a big one. But there are many who will say, oh, $30, I'm moving on. But if you explain you do that every day of the year, that's actually an $11,000 problem. Now I really do have your attention, right? That's like, oh, what percentage of my wages does that represent? Oh, that's a problem. What if we take a look at the environmental profile? For some people, they're going to care about that. What kind of water is embedded in that wasted food? What kind of oil is embedded in that wasted food? Because we're not just wasting money, we're wasting resources. And I think increasingly we'll be talking about this more in terms of meals wasted and in terms of hunger and food insecurity, because we found that that is something that really resonates with people. And, then, of course, once you're paying attention, now people are wondering, I'm measuring this stuff, is it working? So you got to show people success. If people you want people to continue focusing on something, it's important that they see it's working. So, in the way we approach this, we feed back sort of percentage reductions, and we show photos of what's been recorded, so that just as you're cruising through the kitchen, you have this sort of ambient exposure to what's going on from a waste point of view. It's not silent, it's not in the bin, it's active. And you're seeing which items you can be working on. We also found that competition is important, and so if you can get people to personalize this, it helps. So when they throw things away, we usually will suggest that people ask, put their name in, basically. And we would recommend, whether you're doing that in our system or with a piece of paper or whatever, get people to associate themselves, not because you're going to get them in trouble, right? You're not. Clearly, we know waste happens, and we're not trying to beat people up, and we want honest reporting. But because the first thing that occurs when you ask them for their name is they'll say, why? I'm afraid of you. Not, they won't say that, but that's what they mean. And then you'll be able to explain to them that we're not going to beat you up. I want your name because I'm going to thank you. I'm going to do recognition, and I'm going to really applaud your work in helping us fix this problem. Oh, really? That's interesting. Didn't expect that. Okay, so asking people to associate themselves with it. I remember when we started, people asked us to put the name on the system of not me. That was the name, not me. Not me is throwing this away, not me. And then we said, well, not me just won a big award. Who's not me? Oh, not me isn't here. So anyway, people get comfortable putting their name on it. And then you've got the ability to use some subtle, little behavioral science things, gamification, whatever you want to call it. You've got some little social pressure going on here. We haven't seen you in a while. There's no numbers next to your name. Or, hey, who's in first place? We talked to some researchers who told us about randomized incentives and the importance. Once you've been doing this for a long time, how do you keep people engaged? Well, turn it into a slot machine. Periodically, you win. And a little pops up an instant winner, and you go to your manager, and they thank you. So anyway, I'm just showing you this to say this stuff we couldn't really dream of a while ago, right? It used to be the chef dumping stuff out on the loading dock and yelling at people. That is not the deal, right? We're all in this together. The frontline actually commands the point of leverage to fix this. The frontline team members have to be included in this process. That's how we have to do this. So we have to flip ourselves around and not get negative, recognize transparency is critical, make the invisible visible, and work on this problem. And we can really achieve quite a bit. Of course, it does lend itself to a lot of interesting data, and I mentioned that earlier. And photos are one part of that equation. We originally weren't sure how important photos would be, but after showing them to enough chefs, we were like, oh, wow, it actually is a big deal. Because I can tell you I had a bunch of watermelon rind, but it's a big deal if I can look at it and say, that's mostly red. That wasn't trimmed. Or you threw away a bunch of strawberries, but I can look at them and see you lopped off the top third of those strawberries, right? Like I can see it. So photos are helpful to the extent people are interested in that. And so ultimately when you do this, what will occur is you will find that people will change the way they produce. And they will be aware that risk that they were managing, that fear they were working against is not free to transfer, and then they think about it. Well, maybe we don't need quite as much. Maybe we can make more smaller batches rather than one big batch, right? Maybe we can cook to order as we get closer to the end of a meal period so that we have the opportunity to offer the same product but not have the same amount of waste at the end of the period, not the same amount of product merchandised. They'll adjust order guides and menus, and order guides are kind of, if you will, the game plan. If food service were football, you'd sort of have the playbook and the order guides. It's like when we do continental breakfast, we know that we're going to put out 100 croissants and we're going to put out 100 pieces of fruit and all of this. But you know what? You got 100 people. They don't all eat the fruit, and they don't all eat the scone. So I know I need 0.3 pieces of whole fruit per person if this demographic is eating with me. And so the more you can understand what you're wasting, the more you can optimize order guides. You can purchase differently. Often the waste that we see in food service has to do with pack sizes. We bought a big package of something, and no one's going to take the time to take 3/4 of that product for a recipe and then wrap up the rest and store it. They're going to just make it all. And then you're overproducing because of the pack size. And in the end, the influence that occurs on frontline behavior is the thing that's most critical. And so that's what happens. It's not super difficult. You measure, people start thinking differently. We typically see about 50% reduction in pre-consumer waste. That's in environments that have some amount of bulk production. And we were just chatting about this at lunch, that the more you get into straight cook-to-order restaurants where fine dining, everything's right, you order it, they make it, you're going to have less opportunity. You're going to have more opportunity in places with commissary-style production, bulk production, where you're producing food in advance of demand. You're trying to match that demand and production without a lot of precision. And it can save them a lot of money, too. So Anyway, that's really interesting robotic font there. But so that's kind of the quick overview on, how a case study, if you will, of how tools can be implemented to measure and how that measurement can drive source reduction and engage employees and create a whole bunch of collateral benefits. And we haven't really even gotten into those, which is just once people are paying attention to this topic, they're paying attention. Food is not numb. It's not something that is just passing through their hands. It has value. They're part of it. And we've hopefully herded the elephant out of the kitchen. So that hopefully will give you a few ideas to take back if you encounter food service operations dealing with wasted food. It's really simple. Start measuring it, and you'll make change. So thanks. Questions or no?
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was great. I know where I work in San Francisco, we spend so much of our time and energy on recycling and composting because we can measure it relatively easily. And I just love more tools that can help us measure so we can justify doing more of this very important work. So I'm going to take just one, maybe two questions for Andrew because we have a few extra minutes. Yes.
Do you have any contracts with jurisdictions that offer that service for a period of time for certain industries that the jurisdictions can work?
That was a softball, wasn't it?
He's going to pay me really well.
I did not. Yeah, so that's a really interesting question because, how do you get these tools into the hands of people? And there has been a fair amount of experimentation around technical assistance programs to put measurement tools in people's hands. Alameda County's done a great job with it, stop waste. And we've seen others who are doing it as well. So they've taken different forms, but in some cases we're seeing people do complete subsidies, partial subsidies, rebate programs in Oregon, where I'm based. We have an energy efficiency style rebate program where you put in a measurement program and then you have the ability to obtain a rebate to compensate you for what you've invested on it. So they're in it. So there's different structures that are out there, but we are seeing some really terrific public and private partnerships coming together, and it's forcing a lot of good learning because we all speak different languages, right? I mean, I have 2 feet in kitchens, or 1 foot in a kitchen and 1 foot in waste management, and then you add the government side of the perspective to things, and it just, you now have multiple cultures merging, and these are, it's difficult, but it's exactly the work we have to do.
Yes, one more. Take one more.
Have you done projects in the healthcare industry?
When we started the business in 2004, we had no idea, but all of our early clients in the first few years, not all, but the vast majority were hospitals. And we've done dozens, hundreds, I don't know what the number is, many, many, many acute care facilities, and we also do senior living. Hospitals are, sadly, the most wasteful food environment anywhere. But empathetically, again, I get it. Like, there is no more complicated environment for food because of clinical diets, because of the fact you also have a big retail program, and you're usually a community center, which means you are just like a hotel. So you got all that wrapped up together, except there's a risk of killing people. But, so it's tough. Yes, you do a lot. And healthcare is one of those areas you can make a big, big impact.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. We will have time for more questions at the end. So I want you, by the way, I work in the same building as Uber headquarters, so I want you to come and help them out. We know they're wasting a lot of food in their giant institutional kitchen, so yeah, we'll talk later. So we have one more speaker today. Many of you already met her earlier, but let me reintroduce Dana. Dana Gunders is going to be speaking about strategies for reducing food waste, and Dana works at the Natural Resources Defense Council, and she leads NRDC's work on reducing food waste. She recently published Waste-Free Kitchen Handbook, is behind the recently launched Save the Food National Ad Council media campaign, and has authored or co-authored 2 widely cited reports, and has been featured by countless media outlets, including The Dr. Oz Show, Last Week Tonight with Jamie Oliver, CNN, NPR, and the New York Times. She reportedly spends far too much of her free time pondering how to get her 1-year-old daughter to throw less food on the floor. I have a 1-year-old daughter who does the same thing, Dana. So let's welcome Dana.
Thanks, Julie. So I couldn't do this morning because there were too many people, but in case anyone's interested in looking at the book, I'm just going to pass it around so you can kind of glance at it. All right. I have to admit that I did not prepare for today as I did for this morning because I was really kind of, nervous about this morning. But I do. So strategies to reduce food waste. And I feel like I'm also getting called out because this morning I was like, okay, everyone do source reduction. And now I'm kind of having to tell you about some actual success stories on source reduction. So there's that. So I want to start out by just saying that, well, actually, I wanted to get a sense of how many of you are kind of, is it fair to say, work for like a local government? Okay, the majority. That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. So I think, in particular, in local governments, the line starts to get a little bit blurred. Like, it's easy to talk about source reduction and then food recovery and animal feed and blah, blah, blah. But I just want to acknowledge that I think there's kind of some blurred lines there, and particularly a little bit between source reduction and food rescue in terms of solutions that as a local government you can pursue, right? So I just want to acknowledge that up front. And I mentioned this morning, that we have the Ad Council campaign, Save the Food, and showed that some of the materials. And I do think that is an interesting way. The reason that we launched that campaign is because we think it's really important to get out there and do consumer awareness and really start that paradigm shift that I was talking about. And we have been working with local governments on that. The main way that the Ad Council works is that they go through media companies. And they get donated media. So if local governments never did a thing, the campaign would still be out there. It would be out there getting approximately, as I said, $30 million in donated media because Clear Channel is donating billboards, or Viacom and Broadcom and all these comms are doing stuff. And nowadays we also have Facebook donating some ad space and some online digital stuff. But I do think there's a lot of room for local governments to get involved in consumer education, and it's somewhere between using the Ad Council materials, the Save the Food materials that we have available, and the food too good to waste type of education. And there is a little bit of a distinction there. And I actually have somebody working full time for me right now to do outreach to local governments to try to implement the Ad Council campaign in their communities. And what we're learning is that people are coming back to us and saying, okay, do you have a storage guide that we can use? Do you have something that we can hand out at farmers markets or in tabling events? And it's not exactly what the Ad Council does. What the Ad Council does is they do billboards and TV commercials. So it's been kind of an interesting intersect, and we've been looking at, can we produce some of those materials? And I'll say we don't have them yet, but we're hoping to have like a more full suite of materials that can integrate some of the research that Food Too Good to Waste has put into play in order to have a more seamless campaign where you could have the bus stop ads as well as a storage guide all sort of seamlessly together. And it's been pushing us, interestingly, to understand better what local governments do, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The other project that I did not mention this morning that we're working on is around trying to pull together some kind of toolkit that local governments can use when they're trying to address their food waste. And why we have decided to focus on local governments is that we really see them as motivated actors on, they have a waste problem often that they're dealing with. They also have a food insecurity problem within their borders, and perhaps have a climate action plan where they're looking to address climate. And so we think that finding solutions to food waste can hit on a number of those things, and they're much more nimble than working, at the state or federal level, they can do stuff in their own community, and that's where the action needs to happen. So we actually have embarked on a project to create a toolkit. It's modeled after a different project we have at NRDC called the City Energy Project. And the City Energy Project, actually, it works in 10 different cities, and they've placed staff. That's our project. So NRDC and our partner organization have placed staff in these 10 different cities and have kind of given them this toolkit and the staff to help implement that toolkit. So we have kind of visions of doing something similar for food waste, but we don't have the toolkit yet. We're still trying to figure out what can local governments do. And so we are at the beginning stages. We've been funded this year to basically research success stories in different cities, both around the country and actually around the world, and codify that into a set, I'll say a menu of options of different programs and policies that cities large and small could implement. And along with that, we're also trying to create a kind of systematic methodology for how do you profile waste within a city. So we're doing pilots in Nashville, Denver, and New York City, 3 very different cities, and we are going through what we're calling a baseline assessment. So trying to estimate how much food is going to waste in each of those cities, and what does it look like? So what is the pie chart, of all the food getting wasted in a city? What's the total? But then also, how much of it is coming from institutional food service, or restaurants, or retail, or prisons, or whatever else is in the borders. And we're actually building off work that EPA has done to try to come up with some formulas, and then we'll be capturing all of that methodology. We'll be doing waste audits and kind of bin digs to try to validate some of it, and then we'll be capturing that whole methodology and trying to create a calculator that another city that doesn't have the funds to go and do a full-scale assessment could at least kind of get a rough estimate of what it might look like in their city, given what is it called, employee, kind of like per hospital bed, per square foot of retail, per employee at restaurant, or per meal served, so that there's some things you can use. So we'll be doing that. Hopefully I'll be up here a year from now with a lot more actual tools to show you. We'll also be trying to, as part of that, estimate how much is recoverable of all that food. And then in Denver, we're actually going to be doing a detailed analysis of their rescue capacity. So we're going to try to put out there, hopefully at the end of this, we'll have a methodology that others can follow, where you not only can kind of get a sense of how much food is going to waste, but how much of that could have been rescued, and what infrastructure is missing as part of your food rescue capacity that could help. So do you need more cooling space in your food bank, or do you need more refrigerated trucks, or do you actually just need some paid staff capacity, or are you doing a really good job capturing it from retail, let's say, but your restaurants, prepared food, nobody's doing that in your community, and maybe what you need is more food rescue, or maybe you have that rescue, but the soup kitchens themselves don't have the refrigeration space to really take much. So what you really need to be focusing is on buying smaller scale cooling capacity for those delivery agencies. So we're going to try to kind of capture all of that into a quick estimation tool that can be used by cities. And then, as I mentioned, we're sort of looking into what is the menu of options, what can be done and implemented by a local government. And I want to mention just a few of some of the things that we've been finding. We've been kind of working on potential case studies and some that you might find interesting here. So, one of our favorites is this whole sort of some kind of local government support for implementing Lean Path or a similar tracking tool, because as we've seen, it's so effective, it's easy to document the success, and once they're actually using it, it has sort of the benefit of numbers and showing success, and we think that if you can kickstart that in a community, that there's potential that by word of mouth, more entities in the community could do that. So I'll let Andrew answer all the questions about how some of those arrangements have worked and how well they're working, but we're certainly fans of that. We are seeing some cities come out with kind of resolutions. So the U.S. Conference of Mayors actually just in June put forward a resolution, and the city of Phoenix adopted it, was the first city to adopt it. And then, of course, we have our national goals of 50% by 2030. So we're sort of hoping to see more local governments coming out just with a stated goal on it to raise the profile of the issue in their community. Things like share tables in schools. Wendy brought this up a little bit, but, there's a lot of untouched food getting thrown out in schools, and there's a relatively easy fix to that, but you need your school district to be on board with that. And so, the city of Oakland's been working through this, I know, and as other cities across the country have, but there is a role for the local government to play in going to the school district and sort of talking them through what needs to be in place in order to have some of these share tables, in order to consider things like recess before lunch, which sounds really simple, but actually is kind of complicated when you're running a school and have a lot of other logistics to keep in place. So, but share tables in school logistically is not really that hard. They actually got some refrigerators in the schools in Oakland and were able to do that. Really, the trick is being sensitive to anonymity and making sure that people who kind of need the food don't feel uncomfortable taking it. I think there's cities like New York has done a food waste challenge. We're starting to see those pop up where cities kind of sponsor a challenge to the restaurants in town to try to get them to either measure their waste for a certain period of time, or sometimes just donate more. But I think those kind of city-run programs can, again, kickstart, right? And sometimes there are organizations already in place. You can work through the Chamber of Commerce. You could work through, sometimes there are specific, like Denver has Eat Denver. It's 125 restaurants in Denver. So, are there those organizations that are already organized that you can kind of work through to create some, local recognition, get the mayor involved in some kind of an award at the end, those types of programs to just sort of get the conversation going. There's some kind of fun urban harvesting organizations out there where they have fruit trees mapped, and they'll go to your backyard and pick your apples for you. I think those types of that, along with gleaning, are things that are really more about the awareness than they are probably about the actual food, but that plays an important role as well. There's been some neat stuff happening in partnership with food banks. So in Nashville, outside of Nashville, the food bank there actually they worked with some of string beans are a big crop in Nashville. And so they worked with one of the biggest string bean growers to put a processing, to add to his processing line a way to process green beans so that the food bank can then distribute them. So all of the ones that were going to get taken out are now actually being distributed through, and it's huge numbers. Sorry, I have them over there, but it's like hundreds of thousands of pounds of green beans that are now getting distributed in that area. And particularly here in California, we have such an opportunity to be looking at. Somebody asked about farm waste and how do you, looking up the supply chain. And many of us have farms within, the surrounding borders, and are there opportunities to kind of capture some of their waste or their potential waste and get it into your food rescue system, I think is another interesting option. And I guess the last thing I'll say is I think there's a lot of opportunity for both local chef engagement and local sharing portals. Because, again, like the food is getting wasted at a local level, it can get rescued at a local level, and a lot of it's about connecting the dots. I've noticed that chefs are increasingly interested in it. Like, this is a topic near and dear to their heart, whether or not they admit, Andrew, that it's actually happening in their kitchens. Something Andrew and I have talked about a lot because there's sort of a judgment pass there, but chefs learn in their training that waste is not a good thing, and I think there is an opportunity to really engage local chefs in a variety of ways, whether it is doing like a food waste challenge for their own restaurants or getting them to just, highlight a certain meal. Can you do more community engagement through working with different restaurants around the community? So I think there's great opportunity there. And then on sharing portals, there's not that much that's been done yet on this whole idea of like, can you create a mini Craigslist in your community for surplus food? And there, we're starting to see apps pop up. There's one called Means Database. There's one called Spoiler Alert. There's Crop Mobster that's actually getting going in the Sacramento area. So there's a variety of ways to do it, but I think if you can create something and get the critical mass there to really get the community engaged and looking for that, that could have more impact than a lot of things. So those are just some examples I wanted to mention. Let me see if I forgot any from my list. I think one other, I guess, are looking at the health and safety laws, the ordinances in your town to make sure that they're not kind of causing unnecessary barriers for donation, and then also technical assistance for businesses. London did a whole program called Save Food where they actually, chose, it wasn't a huge number of businesses. I think it was like 250 or something, which is not that much for all of London, right? But they actually did active technical assistance where they sent in consultants to, they did the audits, but they also, actively did that kind of thing. And I don't know, I think, do you work deep with some or do you work broad with few? I'm not sure, but I think that there's something interesting there about at least having the capacity within your city to provide that technical assistance for those who are looking for it. So anyways, just some ideas to float your way, and hopefully we can kind of have a discussion and maybe even hear from you guys. And we're still, I can tell you for our municipal toolkit project, we're still in crowdsourcing mode, trying to really hear about the most innovative things that are happening. So it'd be great to hear from you all. I think I will stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dana. Yes, I personally, I'm sure many of you agree, I'm very thankful for all the work you've done to bring this to the attention, really, of America. This is such an important issue, so thank you for that. So let's open it up. We have about 15 minutes. I'll open it up for questions now. Anybody I missed earlier, or were you in the front?
Yeah. Question, but the sharing portals idea, my community, our Buy Nothing page, is actually sharing food. So we had a big barbecue and we had some leftover stuff from our barbecue. And I went on my Buy Nothing page. It's a Facebook group for my local community. And I was like, hey, I have a bunch of leftover barbecue stuff. If you can come get it before noon, that would be awesome. And I had like a whole bunch of respondents, and right away I got that food out of my kitchen and into somebody's hands who could use it that day. So like those portals exist, it's just using them for a slightly different purpose than most people had even thought of when Buy Nothing became a thing for a lot of communities.
Yeah, I love it. Buy Nothing. Great. Yeah, food waste is, I think, just such a great way to just talk about how do we buy less in general. I think it's a hard subject to broach, so food is just a great way to get at that. And so thank you for that. Okay, in the back, I saw your hand out with stripes. Yes. First.
Dana, is it okay if I buy 3 minutes of your time?
Please. I'll give you 5.
Just real quick, I'm sorry, this isn't a question. I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about something. Take a few minutes to do that. My name's Kyle Kogan with Cow Recycle. Dana mentioned me this morning at the plenary, and I just wanted to make sure that you guys in the room were aware of a couple of potential future opportunities that we have in this space. And I'm wondering, just maybe by show of hands, how many people here attended either of our workshops on food waste prevention and rescue, the grant program that we were proposing? Okay, not very many. So I just wanted to let you know a little bit about that. In the governor's budget recently, we had a $100 million line item under the cap and trade funds for greenhouse gas reduction funding. And in there it included funding for organics grants that Dana had mentioned. And for that's targeted mainly at compost and anaerobic digestion facilities. But in there we built in a food waste prevention and rescue component. So if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to look at the criteria. And what that allows is for a food rescue organization to partner with a facility proponent that's going to do compost and AD and build in some rescue infrastructure to that grant program that could be in the form of refrigeration systems or transportation systems to get at rescue food. So that was one opportunity, but there was also a second program that's focused specifically on food waste prevention and rescue. And that was $10 million that was set aside. And Howard's over there in the corner. People are asking about, okay, when are those grant funds going to come through? And I know that's subject to discussions in the legislature. He's going to tell us exactly when. Just kidding, Howard. So what I'm sharing with you is a little hollow in my chest because we haven't been able to release this grant program, but we put a lot of work into forming it up and soliciting input. And those two workshops on food waste prevention and rescue, we took input from rescue organizations, from school districts, from all types of local governments and other stakeholders on how to build this thing. And so we basically heard from stakeholders that they need some of them need smaller pots of money, anywhere from $25,000 to $100,000. And then we heard from others that say, hey, they could use a larger pot of money, these larger scale rescue organizations. So we structured the program so it's broken into two pots. Andrew's hair is growing gray. I'm losing my sight. We go through this, but we also added school districts into the mix. We heard people say, hey, what happens if we shift food, edible, rescuable food from a green bin, from a compost bin, and you get it to food rescue? Can we apply for that? Originally, we hadn't thought of that, so we've shifted that over to where you can get the associated emission reduction benefit by shifting that to rescue. And that's one thing that I briefly mentioned earlier is that there is an emission reduction factor associated with food waste prevention and rescue, and it is 4 to 5 times greater than that of composting that same material. So to kind of confirm what you were saying earlier. Then we also heard from folks that they needed overhead, meaning be able to employ people to help run this program, and we took that into account too on the smaller grants that up to 50% of that cost can be to help staff that program as well. So it's not just infrastructure; it can be overhead as well. And I mainly just wanted to bring that up. If you weren't aware of it, yeah, it's not out yet. It's ready to roll when and if we get that funding approved. And it's our effort to get at the top of the hierarchy. And one additional thing, I'm sorry, but the short-lived climate pollutant plan that the Air Resources Board is working on adopting did integrate food waste prevention and rescue in there. So it acknowledged the importance of that and got that in there about 10% level. That 10% of the food can be prevented or rescued. So it's a big acknowledgement because that plan basically says in 2025, 90% of organics have to be out of landfills. So that's a pretty key driver to what we're doing here. So sorry to take that time. I just wanted to let you guys know that.
Okay, thank you very much. And before you sit down,
yes.
How does everyone in the room stay in the loop and to find out if the money becomes available?
So we have a GHG listserv that you can sign up for. If you need directions on how to get there, look me up. But just go onto Cal Recycle's website and look up listservs, and you can sign up for that listserv. So as soon as anything breaks with the grant programs, any one of those, there are other programs as well, then we can let you know about.
So it's the GHG listserv. You said GHG's listserv. Okay.
Greenhouse gas listserv.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
GHG reductions.
GHG reductions listserv. Thanks very much.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you all for your good work. I have a question about measure. I'm Tom Padilla from Stop Waste. A question about measurement of food waste. Andrew hit on it a little bit when he was talking about the watermelon rinds where you can see red, or the strawberry stem that has a third of the strawberry. I'm wondering if, like in Dana, when you talk about 40% of the food, produced is wasted, does that include things like corn cobs and melon rinds and oyster shells and the inedible portions of food that is consumed? But when we do a waste characterization study, that would typically be called food waste or food scraps in a characterization study. So have you accounted for that? And if so, do you know what percentage of the total that irreducible amount might be?
Oh, that's
Oh. Okay, so the 40% number is a caloric evaluation. And so that actually looks at that number comes from the National Institutes of Health, and they looked at all of our food supply after imports and exports, and they basically compared that with what they know or assume it gets eaten. So, it's a gross estimate, right? It says, okay, we literally have like 17 trillion calories in our food system, and we know that people eat 2,600 calories a day. So, there's the differential. So it's edible. That is actually just on edible food portions. That's how that number exists. The USDA has a different analysis that's based much more on mass, and they come up with a number of 31%. That is only looking at retail, food service, and households, and there's some kind of fundamental challenges with how they look at food service in particular, in my opinion. But point being, they don't really look before it gets to retail. So at that early part of the supply chain. So I think they kind of corroborate each other at this sort of gross level of data that we're working with. I think the 40% stands almost either way, and both of those are only looking at edibles and not inedible. When you look at things like 21% of what goes into landfills is food waste, that does include inedibles, right? That's more of like an organics approach. So it kind of depends.
But that doesn't pick up the on-farm waste.
None of that includes the on-farm waste, right? Which is, again, do you count it as waste? Most farms don't harvest stuff to throw it away, right? So food wasted on farms is often just food that's not harvested, either because the whole field's not harvested or because they're skipping over and only picking the broccoli that's going to fit the specs that they're picking.
I think if you feel like that's a complicated answer, right? I mean, I think it is. And
that was the simple version.
Yeah. So this is the point where I mentioned the WRI standard. So this has been a topic of a lot of conversation, right? And many of you may be aware WRI has published a standard, basically a protocol for measuring food loss and waste, trying to address these disparate data sets, not by enforcing one way of doing it, by creating a framework around it through which we can discuss how we have gone about measuring. So it breaks the universe into starting with food that's been produced with the intent that humans would consume it, as opposed to ethanol, production or something like that. So food that has entered the human food supply chain. And then it looks at, of that, food and inedible parts. And it acknowledges that inedibility is actually culturally specific. And so there isn't a hard and fast inedible definition, right? And so then within that universe of the food, there is food which is consumed, and then there is food which is not consumed. And so the protocol looks specifically at food which is not consumed and inedible parts. And the discussion then becomes, the first thing you do in using this protocol is to say, am I reporting on food, or am I reporting on inedible parts, or am I reporting on both? And then from there, it looks at where are you sending it, because some people declare some things, to your point about what goes in landfill or what, where it goes actually is often very relevant to whether we think whether it's waste, right? So in the protocol, you can say this is going to animal feed, and thus I'm not going to define it as waste. Or I do define animal feed as a waste having occurred, and so thus I disclose it that way. So it's robust, it's complicated, it's not like a quick read, even though they've created like the short 12-page version, but it's a really valuable tool. And I bring it up just because I think anyone who's working on this issue is going to need to be reporting data, is going to need to become aware of this tool and use it, and I'm sure it will be revised. I know it will be revised as it gets more road testing, but that's out there.
And I'll also just to add a couple more things to that is, first of all, if this feels like overwhelming and frustrating, kind of where we are at with measurement and data, I like to go back to that analogy of this is where, energy efficiency, or this is where greenhouse gases were 20 years ago. I think 10 years from now, we're going to have a much better answer to that question. The project that we're doing in Denver, New York, and Nashville at the end of this year, we will have surveyed and dug through garbage cans of 1,000 residents across those 3 cities, and be much better equipped to answer, at least, for those 1,000 residents, and extrapolate from there how much actually was edible of that versus how much was, inedible, or, what was, in England they call it avoidable and potentially avoidable, right? So, I think we'll have better answers for that a little bit, and we're trying to come up with some estimates, again, for, restaurants and retail, how much of that is edible or could have been eaten if it were managed differently. So don't be too discouraged.
Great question, Tom. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, in the red shirt.
This one might be just kind of what I was getting to when I asked you to talk about food at the farm, and it may be outside of our scope, but that whole idea that farmers have to overproduce because they never know what the price is going to be, or if who's going to take their food is going to take it, or if they're going to jump up, all these different things. Is there anything that we can do at the farm level to stabilize the experience that they're having so that they aren't having to deal with the whims of the sales, the retail operator? Is there anything we can do at that level, or is that outside the scope of this conversation?
There are things that can be done. I mean, it's not my specialty, but I think if you look, for example, what Tristram Stewart's group and Feedback is doing in the UK, and how they've really identified, for example, the demand that has impacted Kenyan farmers, and looking at the fact that big grocery stores are canceling orders, and thus really the people who are shouldering that risk are the people way back who are the poorest and least able to shoulder that risk. And we're successful, I believe, in moving legislation through in the UK to put responsibility on the purchaser when they try to amend contracts. So there are some things like that that can create more shared responsibility across the supply chain around, this risk with farmers. That's a little different environment, perhaps, than the big farmer who is, maybe a little more able to shoulder some risk.
No, but I would agree. The shared risk is really the answer, and so community-supported agriculture, right? You look at those boxes, and that's a shared risk model because you're giving them money and you're just taking whatever comes off the farm. And there's some, there's been a couple corporate almost like corporate CSA type of models that have been sort of tried. It's not very far along yet, but kind of long-term contracts where they're somehow sharing the risk, I think, is really the answer. But it's hard because you have big buyers who don't want to take on any more risk. So.
And you also have an innovation space there too, right? Where you've got people who are trying to create products that can go into the fields and literally processing technologies that can go in shipping crates and drop down in the field and be used to process product that wouldn't be used otherwise and turn it into something completely different. And some of this is like totally old school, right? Like how do we preserve, Yeah, so that opportunity is there too.
And relationships between farms and food rescue and gleaning and the big, basically all levels of food rescue, there's more and more relationships developing there. And I actually had a question for Kyle about that because at one point when they were looking at the grant, they were excluding gleaning. Kyle?
Gleaning's not excluded.
Good.
It would have to compete, right? So,
Right, because initially the gleaners thought that they were excluded. I don't know if they were initially, but they'd be happy to hear that now. Because the reason the gleaning was potentially being excluded was because it was never making it into a landfill, so they couldn't, it wasn't a diversion in the same way. So, anyway.
Okay, well, yeah, we've just a short, quick one.
So in San Diego, we're working with the Farmers Bureau. We have the largest population, concentration of middle-sized farms and organic farms. And we're working with them to help them connect with gleaning because they have some concerns, like things that we didn't think. If you have a bunch of volunteers going to the farm, where are they going to go to the restroom? Right? Because they have portable potties for their employees, so you have to bring portable potties. You have to make sure that they have the proper shoes. You have to make sure that they don't bring kids, or if they bring kids, what they're going to do the kids. So liability for the farm. So putting them together with the gleaning, understand their side, what makes the farmers more comfortable, so the gleaning can work better. So that could be something that will work. San Diego.
Okay.
San Diego.
Great. Well, I am going to let everyone go, but before I do, let's give these speakers one more round of applause.